Hello and welcome to our digital Teach Meet. This is the third night of 4 this week. I'm David Monaghan. I'm the editor for Learning here at BBC Northern Ireland. Tonight's session is on mental health and wellbeing and how it impacts on teachers and pupils. Even before the pandemic, there was considerable focus on the emotional and psychological wellbeing of pupils. This became even more pressing with the introduction of lockdown and all that has happened since. For teachers, how they manage their own mental and emotional resilience is crucial during these extremely trying times. We've 3 speakers tonight, and they'll focus on this issue from the perspective of teachers and pupils. We'll also find out how pastoral care can be delivered via technology as part of distance learning. Our first speaker tonight is Dr Emma Kell. Emma is author of How to Survive in Teaching and co-author of A Little Guide to Teaching, Wellbeing and Care. She's also a teacher with over 20 years experience in secondary schools, mainly in North London. She is now going to offer some practical tips for teachers on how they can look after themselves and one another during a global pandemic. Emma, if you're there, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen now. It's always that moment, isn't it? We've been using this for 7 months. There we go. Right. Thank you so much for being here. I feel I should congratulate you on still being awake. I know most teachers I know are absolutely on their knees, and so I'm delighted you're here. I'd like to ask you, the fact that you're here is a brilliant sign because it means that you're thinking about your well-being already. I'd like to ask you to put your marking to one side, any emails you're responding to, put your computer on airplane mode and just spend this few minutes really thinking about yourself. And some of the messages in here are going to seem quite blunt and quite harsh, but I think they're really important. They're more important than ever at the moment. So when I was invited on here, I really liked the brief I was given. And it was about, very simple, it was about looking after yourself. And I went away and I thought about this a bit more. And we often talk about resources in teaching and in the classroom, don't we? We talk about all the resources we have, the skills, the books, the IT resources, all the things we carry around from classroom to classroom. But actually, my argument here is that you are your most precious resource. Your compassion, your kindness, your relationships with young people and with your colleagues, and your very reasons for being in the job. And without you being as well as you possibly can be in a job that is undeniably and inescapably stressful and demanding and noisy, without you making a conscious effort to look after yourself, you cannot perform as well as you possibly could. And the risk is the profession then loses you and we lose brilliant teachers, the kind of teachers who are willing to be online at 7:30 in the evening in the middle of the week. And we don't want to lose you. So here are some key messages. And I can talk about this all day, I warn you, but I'm not going to. Really quickly, just so you know who it is who's lecturing you here. My name's Emma Kell, as you've probably gathered. I've been teaching since before the millennium. Let's just say that for now. I've taught mainly in London. I wrote my first book, How to Survive in Teaching, actually off the back of having a very difficult teaching experience myself. It's very difficult to work in a school where your own moral values aren't aligned to that of the school, and I discovered that the hard way. I've more recently written with my co-author Adrian Bethune a really short, punchy, practical guide to teacher wellbeing and self-care, which is due to be published by Sage Education at the end of the month. This is really important though. I also teach. I teach at a pupil referral unit for children who can't cope in mainstream school for all sorts of different reasons here in Buckinghamshire. And I train teachers, which I love. It's my favourite thing. In any school, the best job ever is working with new teachers, I would argue. So I do lots of different things. And above all, I try to champion teacher wellbeing and self-care because I believe that you deserve to enjoy and feel fulfilled and feel that sense of self-efficacy in your work. So this idea of the precious resource, I don't know how familiar these second 2 images are. There's a series on Netflix. I'm not going mad, I promise. I'll get back to the point. There's a series on Netflix and it's called Away. And it's about a character called Emma, and she's played by Hilary Swank, and she travels to Mars. They fly to Mars. She's a brilliant astronaut. She flies to Mars. She's got a daughter at home, and there's all that. It's a good watch, you know, all the conflict about work and family and all the rest of it. And what happens, we were watching this last night, this was last night's episode, is that they've taken some plants. They've taken some plants to plant on Mars to see if life can grow on Mars. They have a problem with their water supply. So they have to operate on the reserve water supply, and they only get half the amount of water each day. And she, remember, is the captain. So we see her getting more and more and more, if it were possible, emaciated and thinner and looking more and more desiccated. And yet at the same time, there's this one plant which doesn't die, because they've decided they have to let the plants go to let the humans survive. You can't work out what's going on. And then my husband, who's really annoying for a spoiler, said, have you worked it out? Yeah, have you worked it out? And of course, she was giving a significant part of her water supply to the plant to help the plant survive. And at this point, I found myself shouting at the TV, and he was saying, what? She's great. She's brilliant. She's making sacrifices. And I found myself yelling at the TV going, no, but she can't lead if she's not looking after herself. She's not looking after herself. And you have to look after yourself anyway. So that was a lovely example, I thought, as of that idea that whatever cliche you use, whether it's about your own oxygen mask or your own seatbelt, you cannot give your best to others if you are not putting your own needs first. All the other cliches. Self-care is not selfish, and I will bang on about these until I'm old and even grayer than I am now. And this is another harsh message, and I am acutely aware that it is dark now, and that you may well have left school in the dark, and that you may well have woken up and left home in the dark. October is tough. This time of year is difficult without a global pandemic. And yet we have a global pandemic, we have local lockdowns, we have talk of circuit breakers, we have people testing positive in schools, we have a testing system which is really flawed, and you are exhausted. Of course you are. But what we cannot afford to do, because educators are some of the most generous people I know, they will give and give and give and give. What we cannot afford to do is to give to the point where we leave ourselves depleted. And this is a piece of research done by UCL in London with school leaders in the States and Canada. And it was a piece of research done on a group of school leaders who had hit the bottom. They had hit rock bottom. Some were hospitalized. Others had completely lost their closest relationships. They weren't working. They weren't able to work because they had driven themselves into such acute levels of stress. And just to go back to that water analogy, they hadn't been looking after themselves. So we know about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, don't we? And what happens when educators in particular start giving and giving and giving is they forget about those basic needs. And another piece of research that this particular group found was that a lot of educators don't use the toilet during the school day, or they don't, and why is that? It's not just because they don't have time, it's because they're not eating and they're not drinking. So this rock bottom idea is something that we have to save ourselves from, and we have to learn to look out for one another. And that compassion now is more important than ever. And so there's these different levels of stress. We all know that life without stress will be very boring. We know that there is a really good stress in life. There's the stress when no one's speaking to each other when you're packing for the holiday. There's the stress of getting married or moving house. And there's the stress that took you to your interview, which got you the job you're now in, which would have stressed you out, but would have focused itself. Then there's that bad stress, which I think all of us are feeling at the moment. And our job is inherently stressful, and that's inescapable. Which is the kind of stress where you start to get the headaches or the sore neck, or the waking up at strange times of night, or the being really snappy with your partner. And you know, those little bits of stress we can cope with to an extent, but we need to keep an eye on them, because the stress beyond that is that red zone where we stop being able to cope. We stop being able to say no, first of all, and then we stop being able to function. And that has all sorts of devastating consequences. And I've seen too many teachers, too many brilliant teachers and leaders leave the profession because they hit that rock bottom. And I suppose if I've got one mission, it's to stop that from happening. So I want you to think about well-being tells, and well-being tells come from the same people, the same UCL researchers. And it's this idea that we all have a signal that we are starting to move from that bad stress into that ugly stress, that chronic stress. And it can be quite humorous things. It can be quite silly things. You know, it can be quite, I always remember bursting into tears over a bottle of ketchup because I couldn't get the lid off the ketchup. Now, clearly, the issue was not with the ketchup. And I'd like you just to have a little think now. And if you're feeling brave enough, just to share on the chat what it is that happens to you when you are starting to get into that amber zone. So your normal stress, but your signs that you are ceasing to cope as well as you possibly could. I'm going to pause for a couple of minutes just to let you share those in the chat bar. Oops, sorry. It just takes one person to contribute, and then I promise everyone else starts doing it. Yay. Thank you, Marianne. So we've got headaches, tearfulness, but forgetting to breathe. Gosh, yes. And we're breathing from that really high part of the, yes, we haven't had that one before. It's a really good one, Deirdre. Inability to think straight. Yes, that feeling of walking into a room and not knowing why you're there. Tearfulness, yes. And I've actually just been talking to my own school wellbeing group about the importance of somewhere staff can go, which isn't a toilet, where they can just go and have a little cry. Losing patience, headaches, not knowing where to start. Yes. Shouting at my husband, and we do that, don't we? We shout at the people we love the most. Snappiness with our own children. So all of these different things. The other one that happens to a lot of people are the nightmares where there's a class somewhere in the school and you can't get to them. I've just realized that I dreamt last night about trying to take a school trip to Paris and on a ferry, and so overwhelmed, emotional. Good. So those well-being tells and being aware of them in yourself is really, really important, because my advice to you is to listen to them. Listen to your well-being tells, and then do whatever you need to do to reset. And if that is taking a day off, God forbid, taking a day off for your mental health, then do it. And if that is having a drink with an old friend or catching up with an old friend for dinner, then do it. But it's the whole idea of, in our school, we've got a pause button on the wall. You reset, you literally reset yourself, because the consequences of you not doing that are, as in this image, the pressure pot where it all boils over. This is one of my favorite images from the work that I've been doing on wellbeing for about 15 years now. And it comes from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And it's this whole idea of control. And we need, as human beings, to feel self-efficacy, we need a sense of control, don't we? We hate nothing more than thinking about school context, being given a new initiative or a new set of school rules without being told why and without being consulted. It's horrible. So things outside our control are horrible. So there's these 2 circles. They're really handy for thinking about well-being. You've probably seen them before, but it's worth reminding people. In the inner circle, there is your circle of influence. And those are the things in your life that you have direct control over. So let's think about some basics. I had direct control over, just before this meeting, whether I got myself a glass of wine or a cup of tea. I got myself a cup of tea. We have direct control over what we wear in the morning. We have direct control over how we talk to people. If we talk to people, if we look at them in the eye when we're talking to them, we have control over if we're managers in a school, where, when, and how we hold different meetings. And all those things we have control over are really important. Just keeping an eye on those. And then let's think about this for a second. There is the circle of concern on the outside. And the circle of concern are all the things in the world that are really worrying, really important, that we cannot control. And before COVID, we used to talk about things like global warming, war, things like that. But of course, we now have COVID. And so we have these global concerns where, you know, is this ever going to end? People using phrases like the new normal. We don't need this to be normal. I hate that phrase anyway. We have our loved ones to worry about. You know, I still can't see my parents without having to take all of the precautions in the world. And even then it's across the other side of a field. We have our own health. We have all sorts of different things going on. And then we've got local outbreaks. We've got government legislation. I've promised myself I won't get political, and I won't. But we've got all these things. And it's no surprise then that this circle of concern is feeling bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's crushing us. And it's reducing our sense of well-being, our sense of self-efficacy. So there's a task, and I'm not going to ask you to do it now because I'm aware that time is limited. But I'd like you to take this away and do it. And it's really simple. You draw 2 circles. If you want to jot it down now quickly to remind yourself, please do. The inner circle is your circle of influence. The outer circle is your circle of concern. What you need to do is list all the things in your mind that you're worried about, that are making you lose sleep or giving you a headache, and put them in those different circles. And then at the next stage, what you do is you start to move things from that outer circle into that inner circle by taking really clear, really small steps. So they might be things like having that difficult conversation with the member of staff who's undermined you or is making your life difficult. Choose that battle. They might be things like sorting out that weekly supermarket delivery. They might be things like getting a cleaner to reduce some of the stress on domestic tasks if her safety allows, and start to increase that outer circle. Increase the inner circle so that you get that sense of control back. And all the time you're doing this, you're keeping this sense of perspective. I am going to ask you to do an activity in just a moment. So this idea of the main thing, and I hate meetings. Everyone hates meetings, actually. All teachers hate meetings. They are a necessary evil, perhaps, but we hate meetings. The meetings I hate most are the ones where nobody mentions children. And it is remarkably common. It drives me insane. Meetings about KPIs, politics, who sent out what newsletter, who's printing the exam papers. No one mentions children. Drives me insane. So keeping the main thing as the main thing. The reason why you're doing this job is to make a difference to young people's lives, is to share your passion for the subject and your faith in them. And it's keeping that at the center and reminding yourself of why you do it. And I wanted to briefly mention an author called Bronnie Ware, who's written a book called The 5 Regrets of the Dying. It was written a while ago. She's a palliative care nurse, and she interviewed people about their biggest regrets in their final stages of life. It sounds really grim. It's not. It's actually incredibly uplifting. And these are the things I want you to think about. This was the first one. I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself. I mentioned earlier working in a school where my values weren't aligned. Courage to lead a life true to yourself. If you're not happy in your current context, go and find one where they value you, where you are happy. I wish I hadn't worked so hard. It's such a cliche, isn't it? But it's so true. You know, on your gravestone, it's not going to say, I wish I'd spent longer at work. The courage to express my feelings, have that conversation. Interestingly, in my longer version of this, I talk about some negative, positive effects of COVID. One of the positive ones is that people are being much more open about their vulnerabilities. And I think we need to hold on to that. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. After I saw this for the first time, I actually got in touch with old friends and have remained so. And I wish I'd let myself be happier. That sometimes as teachers, as educators, we can be our own worst enemy, can't we? We can be perfectionists. We can worry that it's not good enough. That little ogre on our shoulder, the imposter syndrome, says, "No, you don't belong here. You just got this job as a fluke." We are allowed to enjoy this job. It's fun. It's funny. We're allowed to let ourselves enjoy it despite everything. I want you to do one activity for me. I promise I'm nearly there, and I am aware of time. 3 good things. Now, you've probably heard of this. A lot of people do this every day. They put it in a jar. They do all sorts of things. They might journal it. They might put it on a spreadsheet. You might do it at the end of each day, the end of each week, whatever it is. I'm just going to ask you to do one. And I'm going to ask you to think of one good thing you have done based on this quote here. I love this quote because we talk about intervention in schools all the time, and we imagine it as extra time, extra resources, extra effort. But every time you interact with another human being in your school setting and beyond, of course, You are making a difference. So I would like you now to think about and write down in the chat something that you have done in the last week that has made a positive difference to somebody else's life. It doesn't have to be at work. You might want it to be at home. That's absolutely fine. I want you to actively do that now. And you will be amazed at how hard some people find this, but I'm going to insist. So there are 94 of you. So I expect 94 comments, and I'll check later, to appear in the chat bar in the next 2 minutes. What did you do? Did you notice a colleague looking upset and spend time with them? What did you do? Go. Told someone they were doing a great job. Yeah, how often do we do that? People don't say thank you enough in schools. People don't say well done enough in schools. People don't say sorry enough in schools, in my opinion. Lovely, Louise, thank you. Bought someone a cup of tea, yes. Made dinner for a friend, yes, and who'd had a bereavement, and that idea of just being alongside that person. Checked in with an isolated staff member, and these are now flooding in. That's wonderful. Please keep them flooding in, because we're going to save this chat. We're going to look at it afterwards. We're going to treasure it, because these things are so important, because you are your most precious resource and you can make the biggest difference. So I'm going to leave those running. Please read and enjoy. And I'm going to say one more thing. And my one more thing that I want to say is, do not forget to laugh, because this job is, more than anything else, really, really amusing for a great deal of the time. And I just wanted to share with you 2 things that made me laugh. One is from lockdown, and I can't believe it hasn't been in my life before. Do you have the Biff and Chip books? They're awful. I don't know if you have them in your schools. They're awful. I can't see you. I can't hear you. Don't know whether this is falling flat. And then I promised I wouldn't get political, but I just wanted to do that one. And that's me. Thank you. You can contact me. There are my contact details. Would love to come to talk to you in your schools, whatever, anytime.
Emma, thank you very much. That was fantastic. I've just had, I remember Biff and Chip from school vividly. So it's great. I like that there's new versions coming out. If you have a question for Emma, can you please send them into the Q&A function just at the bottom of the chat? And then Emma, we'll bring you back at the end with the other speakers, and we'll have a wee chat then.
Lovely.
Lovely. Thanks very much for now.